Chapter 329, The Attack, 5. Angus. Jomnuk and Waylon cried out in shock, flabbergasted at the scene presented before them. Their disbelieving looks gave out the betrayal they felt. The shock was too great. Surprised? Smirking, Angus looked at them from a safe distance. Bang! Before Waylon could do anything, the door of the hideout shot wide open and several blue-skinned dwarves emerged out of nowhere. Angus. In a tone full of anger, Waylon waved his hand and formed a small barrier around the few individuals who could not defend themselves. Even though he was alarmed by the sudden turn of events, he managed to keep calm. Don't panic. As long as I'm here, you will all be safe. Stay calm. There will be backup. At that point, Waylon was unsure if he was saying it to the rest or himself. His words felt empty to himself. He did not think that his chances of survival were high. Not only was he surrounded by a hit squad of Duergars, but the poison in his body had also begun to act fast. He wasn't sure, but it might have been due to his movements and casting. Although it wasn't anything serious, it rapidly drained his mana. Being without mana in this situation was tantamount to suicide. It's no use. I've sealed all forms of communication. Your backup call will go unanswered. A triumphant smirk emerged on Angus's face as he moved next to a couple of Duergars. They each held large gun-like devices. You damn traitor! Cursing out loud, Waylon glared at Angus. To think that you were a spy. I'll have to be honest, you'd be the last person I'd suspect. Spitting at Angus, Waylon was incensed. From how uptight and trustworthy he seemed, people wouldn't consider Angus a suspect at first. His cover was both simple and effective. As much as Waylon hated to admit it, Angus's acts as the mother of the group had slightly affected even him. He'd let his guard down. Lifting his head, Waylon muttered dejectedly, I see. So the reason why we weren't able to detect the poison in the food was because you had purposely rigged the device. That's correct. Angus looked towards the few Duergars that had shown up. Each and every single one of them was extremely powerful, almost rivaling Waylon in terms of strength when put together. We've spent a ton of resources trying to infiltrate this place. Who would have expected that just when we thought that it wasn't possible for us, you would select our group for being a part of the protection mission? You wouldn't understand my happiness even if you tried. How happy I was. Shut up. Gritting his teeth, Waylon decided to shut Angus's mouth. Permanently. Since he knew that he was pressed for time, Waylon decided to go all out from the get-go. Although he had wasted a little bit of time listening to Angus talk, Waylon had managed to grasp the situation and form a plan of action. Small-time crooks love to monologue. Turning around while looking at the others, Waylon clenched his hand and a small barrier enveloped each of the individuals present behind him. Ren and Jomnuk also had a small barrier enveloping their body. Don't get out of the barrier. It's the safest place you can possibly be at the moment. He reminded. Then, turning his attention towards the squad of Duergars, Waylon punched out. Vroom. Instantly, a whistling sound arose. Like a thunderclap, Waylon's fist explosively shot forward, forming a pressurized ball of wind that shot towards the Duergar's direction. Staring at the incoming attack, Angus remained calm. With his hand behind his back, he looked towards the Duergars next to him and ordered in a serious tone. Activate the artifact. The Duergars each simultaneously tapped on their right chest. The moment their hands touched it, a small light shot out, converging in front of them. In an instant, a thin, translucent, black barrier formed in front of them. Bang! Right as the barrier formed, Waylon's attack connected, and a thunderous sound resounded across the room. A ferocious wind gale spread out from the point of contact, destroying all of the furniture around the room as dust and debris flew everywhere. "Damn it," a helpless voice rang out before the dust settled. Wayland's fear came true. The barrier stood strong, albeit a little bit faint now. Yet, that wasn't much. He didn't have enough time to deal meaningful damage. "It's no use, Wayland. I've come prepared." Turning towards one of the Durgars on his right, Angus pointed towards Jomnuk, who was currently being protected by a thin barrier. "Go, get him. We'll take care of the others." "On whose watch?" Wayland's voice reverberated across the whole room as he took out his broadsword. A terrifying glow enveloped the blade as the mana in the air converged towards it. Staring at Wayland opposite, Angus pointed at Jomnuk, "Capture him." "Don't you dare!" Wayland raised his broadsword. But just as he was about to slash down, he stopped. "What are ye doing, Wayland? Attack that traitorous wretch!" Jomnuk shouted from behind Wayland. But it was this voice that reminded Wayland about where he was. He was currently inside of a mansion built underneath the mountain. "Fuck!" Wayland swore out loud. If he went all out, then he would put everyone at risk, as the whole place could crumble down. Staring at Wayland in the distance, Angus's lips twisted upward. "Focus on Jomnuk, ignore the others." Pulling a small black box out of thin air, Angus threw it next to him. Then, after waving his hand, the box lit up and the mana in the air started to twirl towards it. Before long, a black portal started to form. Sheeing. The moment Wayland saw the box, he knew just what Angus was planning on doing. As such, he instantly cut down. Understanding the predicament he was in, he decided to cut down on his power to 40%. The moment he attacked, the mana in the air condensed onto the top of his sword and a terrifying white slash formed, headed towards the Durgars that were trying to get to Jomnuk. But just like before, the Durgars at the back tapped on their chest and formed a barrier. Bang! The moment Wayland's attack met with the barrier, the whole room shook. Crack! 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 Large cracks formed on the ceiling of the room, and pieces of rocks fell towards the ground, narrowing Wayland's visibility. Swoosh! Emerging from the cloud of debris were two Durgars. They directly headed for Jomnuk, who watched on with a frightened look. Hup! Stomping his foot on the ground, Wayland put his broadsword away and shot towards the nearest Durgar. After thinking things through, he decided to let go of the sword and focus on close combat. The broadsword put him at a disadvantage in this kind of environment. The area was perilous and narrow. Vroom! But the moment Wayland shot towards the Durgar, as though the latter had been expecting him, the enemy stomped the ground. Thereafter, clenching his hand, black gas filled the area. "You sneaky bastards!" Covering his face with his arms, Wayland stopped breathing. Unfortunately, because it had happened all too abruptly, he was unable to completely stop himself from breathing in the gas. Irk! Instantly, Wayland's mana reserves took a nosedive and his head started to spin. Thud! With a small thud, the Durgar that had released the poison fell onto the ground. His body had completely dried up. He was dead. It was a suicide attack. To think that they're going as far as to kill themselves to make this successful. They are all mad. Wayland thought as he had one hand on his nose and the other holding onto the wall. Clang! The sound of metal striking something hard resounded. Turning around, Wayland realized that the other Durgar was already upon Jomnuk. The only thing separating the Durgar and Jomnuk was the thin barrier Wayland implemented to protect him. Oh, no. Wayland's mana supply was already extremely low. He wasn't sure for how long he could keep holding the barrier. Wayland, I don't have any artifacts. I need help. Help! Waylon! Banging onto the thin shield, Jomnuk cried out for help. His face was white as paper, and his legs were trembling. I'm coming. Supporting his body, Waylon tried to move towards Jomnuk. However, the enemy chose to give no respite. Before he could take a step, another Durgar quickly jumped in his direction. Crack! Arg! Before he knew it, the same black fog enveloped him. Fortunately, Waylon was prepared this time. He didn't inhale anything, but the black gas had completely shrouded him. Pressing his toes on the wooden floor, the flooring beneath him split apart and his body shot towards the Durgar trying to attack Jomnuk. Bang! Bang! But just as he moved, two more Durgars appeared before him and tried to stop him.
Huh?
They tried to repeat the same thing as before, but Waylon was prepared to stop it this time. Waving his hand, he pushed them back with a blast of mana and continued to run towards Jomnuk. But he was too late.
No!
Crack, crash. By the time he had come close, the barrier broke apart and the Durgar threw something in Jomnuk's direction. Within seconds, a transparent net enveloped Jomnuk and completely captured him. Sheeing. It was do or die. No longer caring about the environment, Waylon once again took out his broadsword and prepared to slash down. But, before he could do that, the Durgar held a small dagger by Jomnuk's neck. The blue glow of the net highlighted the Durgar's features, making him look sinister. Stop or he dies. Fuck. Waylon cursed out loud. He hated this. He was so close. His grip on the broadsword tightened considerably. Seeing that his threat had worked, the Durgar spoke more confidently, "Take one more step and he dies." Angus looked on from afar. A victorious grin was plastered on his face. You bastards! Gritting his teeth, Waylon glared at Angus, who chuckled at his misery. As expected of a dumb human. You were too easy to manipulate. As Angus spoke, the Durgar holding Jomnuk hostage slowly walked in his direction. Jomnuk had long passed out. As he moved, the Durgar continued to hold the dagger on Jomnuk's neck, his eyes never leaving Waylon, who was standing still, staring at him from afar. Clench! The sound of Waylon's fists clenching tightly was heard clearly in the quiet room. He could do nothing at the moment. With Jomnuk's life in their hands, Waylon could do nothing but just watch them take him away. A truly helpless expression appeared on his face. Damn it all. Before long, the Durgar finally reached Angus. He passed Jomnuk over to him. Good work. Taking Jomnuk's body, Angus didn't waste any time and simply waved his hand towards Waylon. Well then, we'll be taking our leave.
Goodbye.
Waylon. Giving a final victorious look, Angus stepped towards the portal. While walking towards the portal, a thought entered Angus's mind. He suddenly halted his steps. The sudden stop seemed hesitant, but he still turned to look at Waylon for a moment. Taking out a small device, he threw it in the middle of the room. Just gotta make sure you don't try anything silly. No hard feelings here. Boom. Right after he threw the item, Angus threw Jomnuk's body into the portal. Ding. Ding. Shortly after, the item that was thrown on the floor started to beep. It was then that it finally dawned on Waylon's face. The device was an explosive. Why you? Cursing out loud, Waylon turned around and moved towards Ren and the others. Staring at Waylon's desperate figure from where he was, Angus waved.
Goodbye.
And entered the portal. I'll see you later, in hell. Ignoring Angus, using his last bit of mana, Waylon created a massive shield and enveloped everyone that was present in the room. You crazy bastard. Mark my words, Angus Dash. Glaring at the portal in the distance, Wayland's bloodthirsty scream resounded across the whole room. I will kill you. Boom. What followed after was a terrifying explosion. Chapter 330, Inferno 1. Inside of a dark room, a loud slap echoed. Smack. Oi, wake up. With a bald head, a white beard that was so long it felt like it hadn't been cut in months, and bluish-purple skin, a creature resembling a dwarf spoke in a hoarse tone. If you don't wake up within a minute's time, I'll make you feel something worse than the previous smack. A vicious aura revolved around the blue-colored dwarf as he looked in front of him. A frail old dwarf sat there. Bald head, braided hair, and wrinkling face, the dwarf was none other than Jomnuk. The only dwarf that knew the access code of the security system. At the moment, he had both eyes closed shut and his hands were strapped on top of a large metallic chair. He wore a one-piece gray clothing and all of his beard hair was unbraided. Since artifacts were hard to identify, they decided to strip Jomnuk of everything. Although his mana was sealed because of the poison, it was still best to remove all of the items that he was wearing. Smack! The blue dwarf once again smacked Jomnuk in the head. You're finally coming to your senses? This time, the blue dwarf finally managed to get a reaction. Jomnuk's eyes twitched slightly. It wasn't long before he finally opened his eyes. Upon opening his eyes and staring at the blue dwarf in front of him, a frightened and bewildered look appeared on Jomnuk's face. Huh? Where am I? What is going on? Moving his body, Jomnuk found that he was bound to the chair he seated. What the dash? You finally came to your senses. Taking pleasure in Jomnuk's struggle, the blue dwarf flashed a sadistic smile. Hearing the blue dwarf's words, Jomnuk finally came to his senses. He looked at the Durgar and asked in a worried tone, Who are you? Let me introduce myself. Plaque. Plaque. Tapping onto something, the dark room was instantly lit up by bright white lights. Once the lights turned on, Jomnuk was finally able to see his surroundings. But upon witnessing what was inside of the room, a look of horror flashed in his eyes. Because the whole room was one massive device connected to a helmet. Why, you're insane! Bam! Smacking onto the metal armrest of the chair, the blue dwarf leaned closer. My name is Carl Cullum and as you can probably tell, I am a Durgar. Walking towards the back of the room and taking the helmet, Carl flashed an evil smile. Although I'm not exactly famous among you dwarves, amongst us Durgars, I'm extremely well known. Walking back towards Jomnuk, he dangled the helmet in his face. If you want to die peacefully, tell us how we can access the main defensive systems. If you refuse to do so. Spurt. A fountain of blood sprayed all over the room as Carl stabbed Jomnuk in the thigh. Huh? But contrary to his expectations, in what should have been a pained and desperate scream, Carl was met with two cold, emotionless eyes. A chill ran down his spine. Without taking his eyes off of Carl, Jomnuk took note of his injured thigh. Then, looking up and staring at Carl, he muttered in a voice completely lacking an ounce of fear, Is that all you've got? Pooey. Turning his head, Jomnuk spat towards the right side of the room. Oh. Carl shook his head and shrugged off the cowardice in him. It looks like you still got some grit in you. Approaching Jomnuk and grabbing him by the hair, Carl lifted his head up and stared at him in the eyes. On his right hand was the helmet-like device. I want you to say that again while looking at your face. Where are your tough words from before? Lost all confidence already? Coldly looking at Carl, Jomnuk did not answer. Smirking, Carl turned his attention towards the helmet-like device in his hand. Raising his hand and shoving the device on top of Jomnuk's face, Carl spoke up. You see, the device on your head is my own creation, and what it does is something simple. Clank! Carl locked the helmet on Jomnuk's head. The helmet will help me extract the memories in your head. Although it is still in the development stages, I should be able to extract some information regarding the defensive barrier from you. As he spoke, Carl couldn't contain his excitement. The device was one of his latest inventions and had the ability to extract the memories of the subject put under it. Ever since he heard that Jomnuk had been successfully kidnapped, he couldn't hold his excitement. That was because he knew that they would task him with the job of extracting his memories. The prospect of looking through the memories of one of the greatest dwarven engineers ever excited Carl to no end. He didn't actually care about the war nor for the information to disable the defensive system, all he cared about was Jomnuk's knowledge. Clasping his hands together, Carl could no longer contain his excitement and pressed on the top button of the helmet. Ding! The moment he pressed onto the top button, the helmet lit up. I can't wait to extract all of those juicy memories. She should just about be done by now. Huh? Lowering his head, to Carl's shock and horror, a thin white hue enveloped Jomnuk's body. What? Impossible. Your mana was supposed to be sealed. Pointing his hand toward Jomnuk's direction, Carl took a step back. Fear and disbelief dyed his face. That was because Jomnuk, the dwarf that they were supposed to have captured, started emitting mana from his body. The poison was supposed to last at least a couple of days. Something was terribly wrong. But before Carl could figure anything out, Jomnuk broke free from his restraints and took off the helmet from his head. Then, without wasting any time, he explosively shot towards Carl's direction. His speed was unbefitting that of a dwarf as he reappeared right in front of Carl. His speed was so fast that Carl had no time to react before Jomnuk reached out his hand and grabbed him by the throat. KHH. He then lifted Carl in the air. No matter how much he struggled, Jomnuk's grip was far too strong. It wasn't long before Carl's already blue face turned a deeper shade. Many times Carl struggled to retaliate, to beg. But Jomnuk's grip was far too strong. He couldn't speak at all. Before long, his eyes turned white and he passed out. Turning his attention away from Carl, Jomnuk clicked his tongue. Tisk, I've got to make this quick. Putting his hand on his face, Jomnuk grabbed at it and pulled forcefully. In a fluid motion, Jomnuk's face ripped apart. Underneath was a youth with black hair and blue eyes. The figure was none other than Rin, who was considerably shorter than his real self. In order to disguise himself as Jomnuk, he took a potion that decreased his height. Hoo! Breathing out loud, Rin didn't waste time. Taking out his clothes, he quickly replaced them with Carl's. After that, he put the mask on Carl's face. What followed after was a subtle blue glow that enveloped the room. Done. After a while, Rin retracted his hand from Carl's face. Putting the mask on his face, Rin did not channel his mana quite yet. He was currently low on mana, he needed to conserve some of it. Clank! Locking Carl into the chair, Rin put the helmet on his face and turned to face the right side of the room. There, standing not so far from Rin, was Angelica. Though her complexion was pale, she stood in the corner of the room with her finger pressed on a small device that stood at the top left corner of the room. You done? Yes. Angelica coldly replied back as she took her finger away from the small device in the corner of the room. TSK TSK TSK. Being so cold all the time, who knows if that's the secret to your skin? Getting a little warmer might not hurt, you know. I know I annoyed you, but still. Rin cursed internally. Still, he had to give credit where it is due. Good, he smiled. If someone paid close attention, the moment Ren smiled, one could see a missing tooth. If not for the fact that Ren had been slapped in the face, one might think that Carl was the one responsible for the missing tooth. But, in fact, the one responsible for it was Ren himself. Since he knew that the Durgars would strip him of everything he had, he knew that he couldn't have Angelica turn into a ring. As such, after pondering over the issue for a while, he came up with a brilliant idea. Have Angelica use her skill to turn into a tooth. The moment he proposed the idea, Angelica almost blew him all the way to the other side of the room. If not for Douglas and Waylon's intervention, he wouldn't know how he would have died. In the end, it took a lot of convincing and bribing to finally make Angelica turn into a tooth. That aside, the reason why Angelica had appeared in the corner of the room was because Rin needed her to disable the surveillance system. Once Rin woke up and spotted it, he immediately spat her in that direction. By disabling the system, Rin was able to switch places with Carl without alarming the others. But, of course, the fact that the surveillance system had been disabled definitely did not go unnoticed, but with the aid of the Mask of Dolos, he should have no problems passing off as Carl. Angelica, I need you to turn back into a tooth. Closing her eyes, a look of disgust appeared on Angelica's face. Eventually, she nodded and walked in his direction. Thanks. Rin thanked Angelica as he fixed his clothes. Without needing to look at Angelica, he knew that she was currently displeased. But he was helpless. They both knew that the breakdown of the surveillance system had alarmed someone. Soon, someone would come in to check up on him. Knowing that he couldn't just have Angelica stand still in that form. Bear with it for just a little bit longer. Rin muttered as he fixed the helmet on Carl's face. This looks good enough. Rin thought as he looked at Carl, seated opposite him. At the moment, Rin was wearing Carl's clothes, and his head was covered with the helmet. If someone came in, only if they paid close attention would they notice that something was wrong? But it's not like Rin would let them. His plan was simple. Unlike last time where he had to escape back at the monolith, Ren's goal this time was the opposite. Instead of escaping, he planned on infiltrating. For that, he had made many preparations, and he wasn't going to let something like this ruin all of his plans. What are you doing? Startling Ren, who was fixing himself, a slender hand suddenly grabbed his jaw. Opening his mouth, Angelica replied with a deadpan face, I'm doing as you asked. Wait. Pushing Angelica back, Ren facepalmed. Although I told you to turn back into a tooth, that doesn't mean you have to go back in my mouth. He then pointed towards the corner of the room. You know that you could have just turned yourself there and no one would have said anything. At Ren's words, Angelica's usually cold facade crumbled. Her cheeks turned slightly red. This obviously did not go unnoticed by Ren. He smirked. Oh my? Are you blushing from embarrassment? Shut up unless you want to die. Angelica threatened, sparks of demonic energy going off around her. Glaring at Ren, she walked towards the corner of the room and prepared to transform. Clank! But right as she was about to, the door of the room swung open and a Durgar rushed in. Carl, everything okay? Chapter 331, Inferno, 2. Waylon's mansion.
Ugh.
Slumping down on a large sofa, Waylon let out a pained groan. That actually hurt. Don't be so overly dramatic. Douglas replied with a slight smile, sitting on the seat opposite to him. If you act like that, no one will believe you. You think? And here I thought I was convincing enough. Gotta say acting is quite hard, eh? I really think that your acting was fine, though. Douglas chuckled from the side. I swear that I will kill you. Your scream was so loud that even I could hear it. Stellar acting, Waylon, he added. Maybe I was just too into it. After all, you don't often get fun chances like this. Waylon smiled wryly. There was nothing funny about what happened. It was very risky, and even you could have died, Douglas chided. Giving Douglas a look, Waylon spat. As if. From the very beginning, he had never been poisoned. In fact, everything went according to Ren's plan. Not once had he been in danger. It went so according to plan that Waylon actually felt a little afraid. Just how amazing was that kid's foresight? Does he even know how good he is? Nonetheless, Waylon was pleased. Lifting his head, he chuckled. Those bastards will never think that everything that happened today was part of our plan, including the leak. Just remembering Angus's triumphant face made Waylon chuckle to no end. I wonder what kind of face those bastards would make once they realize it all. They'd been duped and had just invited in a calamity called Rindover. Listening to Waylon's words, Douglas kept a calm smile on his face. His friend was in a good mood, and it made him happy. Especially when what Waylon said was true. They were indeed the ones that purposely leaked out the location of where Jomnuk was staying. Not explicitly, but through the use of the spies sent by Inferno. Since Waylon was responsible for picking some of the people that were allowed to be selected in the protection mission, he purposely chose 2 spies from Inferno. One of them was Angus. The reason they were able to select Angus was because they weren't working alone. After sharing their plan with Jomnuk, he readily agreed and helped them get in contact with one of the top dwarven executives. As he was quite high up, he was able to tell them the right candidate to choose from. Much to Waylon and Douglas's surprise, the selection was quite large. There were a lot of spies they could have chosen from. Although the dwarves could not find every single spy that was in their midst, for those that had been found out, they wouldn't immediately arrest them but use them to their advantage, such as in situations like this. That aside, in total, only around 5 people knew about what was happening. Since there were spies everywhere, the fewer people that knew, the better. With a worried frown, Waylon looked towards Douglas and asked. Hey, you think he's going to be all right? I have no idea, Douglas shook his head, we will know soon enough. If that child succeeds, then we will have an upper hand against the demons that are attacking. Finally, an upper hand in the war. Waylon muttered. Putting his arms around the couch, Waylon stared at the ceiling of the room. I sure hope you're right. If Ren truly succeeded in the operation, then they truly would be able to land a massive blow to Inferno, which in turn would make the dwarves owe them a massive favor. From the very beginning, their goal was to improve their relationship with the dwarves. If they succeeded in this mission, they would finally be able to go back home. In any case, we have already done everything that we could have done to help him. The rest is up to him. Stroking his beard, Douglas looked towards the door of the room. That aside, we'll have more pressing matters to attend to. Bang! And right as his words faded, the door slammed open and an enraged dwarf walked in. Glaring at Douglas, he shouted. Douglas! Master Carl, is everything okay? Barging into the room was another blue-skinned dwarf. Upon entering the room, the Duergar spotted Carl standing in the middle of the room. He seemed to be staring at a dwarf wearing a large helmet. Fiddling with the helmet in the dwarf's head, different colored lights flashed. Tick! A subtle ticking sound rang by the corner of the room, but this went unnoticed as the Duergar's attention was on Carl. Turning his head, Carl glared at the dwarf that had just entered. What are doing there standing in a daze? What the fuck are you doing and why have you disturbed me? I apologize. Carl's words caused the Duergar to flinch. Standing still, and mustering all of his courage, the guard spoke up. The surveillance system is not working, so I thought that something was wrong. The surveillance system is not working? Raising his brow, Carl looked towards a certain spot of the room where a surveillance device was installed. Touching his brow, he muttered. Strange. Seeing Carl calm down, the Durgar also managed to relax a little. That's right. The reason why I decided to intrude was to make sure that you were safe and that nothing had happened. Pinching his brows, Carl's eyes soon lit up. I think I know what the problem is. With his back still facing the Durgar that came in, Carl patted the helmet on Jomnuk's head and asked. Let me ask you a question. Did the device stop working once I activated the helmet? Frowning, the Durgar swiped left and looked back at the video footage. After a while, his eyes lit up in surprise. Yes, you're correct. Smiling, Carl patted the helmet. Then, it's probably because of this. The device requires a lot of energy, so it short-circuited the system. Don't worry about it. With you guarding me outside, there should be no problems. I understand, sir. Sighing in relief, the Durgar bowed and put the device away. I apologize for disturbing you and wish you the best with your task. Click. Clank. After that, he turned around and left the room. Once the Durgar guard left the room, Rin, who was disguised as Carl, touched his face. Seems like the coast is clear for now. His plan had worked. He had managed to successfully infiltrate Inferno. There's still stuff to do. Infiltrating the place was only step one of the plan. It was also the easiest step. What he was about to do next was definitely going to be much harder than what he had done before. Turning his attention back to Angelica in the corner of the room, Rin called out. Angelica, it's time. At his call, Angelica instantly reappeared before him. At the moment, her complexion was quite pale, and in order to remain standing, she had to lean on the wall. It became apparent to Rin that transforming twice took quite a toll on her. Walking up to her, Rin extended his hand in her direction. I'm sorry, Angelica. But, we don't have much time. Do you have it ready? Yes, I do. Lifting her head, Angelica nodded her head. Then, waving her hand, a thin scroll appeared in her hand. Check it. Tell me if there's anything you're unsatisfied with. Taking the scroll floating midair, I carefully checked its contents. Looks good. I nodded in satisfaction as I looked at what was written on the scroll. The contents were almost identical to that of the mana contract I signed with Angelica. However, the only difference was that the contract would only last for half a year as opposed to the mana contract, which was 5. As per the main mana contract, even if I want to harm you, I can't do anything to you. So, you don't have to worry about me trying to scam you. No, I understand. The contract in Ren's hands at the moment wasn't a mana contract, but in fact, a demon contract. In order to infiltrate the facility properly, after pondering over the issue for a long time, Ren decided to sign a contract with Angelica. By signing a contract with her, he was essentially going to turn into a villain or contractee. His mana would become tainted with demonic energy, and his emotions would become more erratic. But this was a risk that Ren was willing to take. Once his mana became tainted, not only would it reduce the chances of him getting caught drastically, but it would also grant him a small power boost. Unfortunately, as he had not consumed any devil fruit, his boost wouldn't be anything impressive. He'd probably be at around C+. All right, let's sign it. Biting his thumb till he bled, Ren placed his thumb on the contract. Shia. The moment his thumb pressed onto the contract showed a dark hue and slowly levitated upwards. Then, small threads of demonic energy encircled the contract in a circular and random manner. With each passing second, the threads of demonic energy in the air increased, and before long, the whole contract was enveloped by a black ball of demonic energy. Ren, who was standing below, watched this scene in amazement. So, that's how my words and ideas manifested. This is how a demon contract takes place. Before he could finish staring at the scene, the black ball expanded, only stopping until it reached the size of a basketball. Similarly staring at the contract in the air, Angelica eventually snapped out of it and said, "Get ready, Ren." "I'm ready." Looking at Angelica, Ren slowly closed his eyes. Right as he was about to close his eyes, from the gap in between his eyelids, the last thing he saw was Angelica raising her hand and placing it on his head. The moment her hand touched his head, his eyes turned white and he passed out. Fortunately, Angelica was there for him. She swiftly supported his body. Plop. On another note, the moment he passed out, the mask on his face fell off. Fortunately, for a little bit, the coast was still clear. Dragging Ren's unconscious body to the side, Angelica leaned him on the side of the wall. TCH. 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 From time to time, his body would twitch as thin black threads of demonic energy seeped into his skin as though they were worms. Taking her eyes away from Ren, Angelica didn't turn herself back into a tooth. Not that she was interested in once again becoming one. Sitting opposite of Ren, with her legs crossed, Angelica closed her eyes and tried to recuperate her demonic energy. Chapter 332, Inferno, 3. Ba dump. Ba dump. The rhythmical pulsating sound of my heart beating resounded in my ears as my vision was enveloped in darkness. Apart from the sound of my heart, I could feel, smell, and see nothing. But this sensation did not last for long, though. An uncomfortable energy dug into my muscles. I could feel it forcefully making its way through my body, tearing into me. I could feel the sinister and dark energy trying to change the structure of my body as it entered me. It wasn't pleasant. Many times, my body tried to reject it, but as though it was bound by something, the energy continued to claw its way in, and before I knew it, the sinister energy had completely settled, making itself a new home inside me. And it wasn't long before the energy reached all the way to my brain, and when it did, my head started to hurt like crazy. Several different flashbacks went through my head as the pain inside increased with each passing second. It felt as if the demonic energy was banging the sides of my head, trying to break through the skull to make its way outside. It was excruciating.
Ha.
Before I knew it, my eyes shot wide open and I stood up.
Ha. Ha.
"You're awake?" Breathing heavily, it was only upon hearing Angelica's voice that I remembered what had happened. Shit. Leaning back and sitting down on the ground, I tried to catch my breath. Lifting my head up, I looked at Angelica and mustered the strength to ask a question. "How long was I out for?" "Half an hour." Standing up, Angelica softly replied. "Only?" It honestly felt like a whole day passed. "Do you feel any different?" "A little bit." Clenching my fists, I realized that something was indeed a bit different. I was a lot stronger than before. I've broken through to C+ rank. It was then that it finally dawned on me. I had broken through to the next level. Propping my body up with the aid of the table next to me, I raised my hand and channeled some wind scions. Shoo! The moment I channeled the wind scions, a green hue enveloped my hand. However, contrary to the usual pale green color that would arise whenever I channeled my mana, black threads of demonic energy circled the chartreuse-like hue. Staring at the black threads of demonic energy, my eyebrows furrowed. It worked. I was now officially a contracted individual. Angelica, who was watching by the side, reminded, use as little mana as possible. I felt concerned by Angelica's words. Something about it nagged my mind as if I should pay attention to it. Turning my head to face her, I asked, "Why's that?" "Because the more you use your mana, the faster the demonic energy in your body will corrode your brain. That's problematic." Staring at the mask of Dolos in my hand, my brows knit even more tightly. Then I better finish this next part quickly. Putting the mask back on my face, I felt a familiar wiggling sensation and my face soon morphed into that of Carl's appearance. Heading towards the door, I spoke inside of my head. "Angelica, stay here. Knock anyone that enters this room out." Since everyone here was contracted to a demon, upon killing them they would immediately be alerted. I had no choice but to refrain from killing. At least for now. Understood. Good. Click. Clank. Opening the door of the room, I took a step outside. Greeting me at the entrance of the room was the same Durgar from before. "Carl? Is there anything that I can help you with?" "Yes. I've managed to extract some information. I'd like to meet up with the elders." The guard's eyes instantly lit up in joy. "Understood. I'll relay the information right now." Taking out a small communication device, the guard communicated with someone else. Before long, putting the device away, the guard turned towards me and gestured me to follow along. But just before leaving, I opened my mouth to speak, "Tell the guards that will patrol this area to never enter the room." "Huh? Let me repeat, if anyone tries to enter that room, I will kill them. I do not want anyone touching my equipment. If something goes wrong, who will take responsibility for calming down the elder's wrath?" Listening to my words, a frightened look appeared on the guard's face as he repeatedly nodded his head. Yes, understood." See, I clank. Walking towards the door, the guard pressed his hand by its side. Moments after, a clicking sound rang. Turning his head to face me, he said, "I've locked the door. Unless I'm present, no one should be able to break into the room." "Good." I nodded my head with a satisfied look. "All right, let's get moving then." Interlocking my hands behind my back, I urged the guard to move. The location wasn't too far. I was led inside of a large hall within a matter of minutes. Right as we arrived at the hall, the guard stopped at the entrance and didn't dare walk in. His status was too low to enter the hall. Walking inside and standing in the middle of the large hall, I stood face to face with some of the higher-ranking members of Inferno. Judging from how they were all already present, it seemed as though they had been expecting me. The pressure oozing out of their body was terrifying, but I kept my cool. "So you've found a way to disable the defensive system?" Staring back at them, I nodded and replied in an unconcerned tone. "That is correct. I've managed to extract the memories of that bastard, and so I know exactly how to disable their defensive system. If you grant me access to the system, I will be able to disable the defenses from right here." "Oh." My words instantly caught the interest of the people present. In particular, the interest of an old Durgan lady with thin white hair seemed piqued. She gave a sinister smile and mumbled quietly, but I was able to hear her words. "How interesting." With her eyes fixed on me, the same lady asked, "How long do you need to disable those bastards' defensive system?" 2 days per beacon." I replied without the slightest hint of hesitation. There were a total of 15 beacons installed around the walls. Each beacon connected with each other to create the massive barrier that protected the whole shield. If nothing goes wrong, perhaps maybe even 1 day. 2 days, and if nothing goes wrong, 1 day? The answer did not seem to please the lady. Her face scrunched up in annoyance. She spoke in a demanding tone, "That's quite a long time, don't you think?" "It is not," I calmly shook my head. "If we take into consideration the fact that all the information I have regarding the disablement of the beacons has come from a bunch of fragmented memories, the half-a-day estimate can only be considered fast. That makes sense. An older Duergar muttered from the side. He, like Carl, had no hair on his head. His beard, which was gray-colored, extended all the way down to his chest, and he had 2 blood-red eyes that exuded a terrifying bloodlust. He didn't seem like someone I could take lightly. Turning to face the old lady, the old Duergar spoke, "We should already be satisfied with this development. Who cares if it takes half a day or more? At the end of the day, what matters is the destruction of those bastards." Clenching his fists tightly, he continued, his face full of anger, his expression hateful. "We've waited for this moment for years. We're so close to our goal. We mustn't mess it up. What is this little bit of extra time to us?" "You're right, I was being hasty." The sight of the end clouded my judgment, the old lady replied with a sentimental look, recomposing herself right after. Turning her attention back to me, she ordered, "I, Durara Lochlam, the 3rd Elder of Inferno, hereby grant authority to Carl Cullum equivalent to that of a senior advisor. You may be granted access to as many resources as possible." Pausing, the old lady, Durara, glared in my direction and slowly opened her mouth. "You understand what I just did, right?" "I do," I replied back. Of course, I knew what just happened. I didn't infiltrate the place here without making any preparations. Whilst waiting for them to make a move, I spent the month training with Waylon as well as absorbing everything that was available regarding Inferno. I knew who the people in front of me were, the way they behaved, their hierarchical system, and a little bit more. It would have been stupid of me to come here without knowing at least this much. I had to prepare myself thoroughly. A covert operation had 1,000 different ways to go wrong, and I couldn't afford a single one of them. This was also why I knew what kind of authority I was just granted. "If you understand, I'd like for you to get to work." Pausing, Durara looked towards the other Duergars seated in the hall. "I believe that no one has problems with my arrangements." She was met with silence. Believing it to be an act of silent affirmation, she scanned the room once with a sharp gaze. Durara turned her attention back to me. "I'll take that as a yee." "Wait." But before she could finish her words, someone interrupted her. "What is it?" This obviously annoyed her. She glared towards the one who interfered. Soon, her eyes paused on another Duergar seated in the hall. He had short white hair and a long braided beard. A terrifying and chilly aura spread out from his body. "Hutrud? Do you have a problem with what I said?" Durara spoke with an annoyed tone. Raising his hand to gesture her to calm down, Hutrud replied, "Don't get me wrong, I have no problem with your arrangements." "Then, why did you interrupt me?" Durara raised her voice. Even as another elder, she wasn't willing to tolerate an act like that. Turning his attention towards me, Hutrud pointed at me, "I have no problem with your arrangements, but the rate at which you're going about implementing them, now that's another story. To put it bluntly, I think you're being too hasty." "Too hasty?" Durara raised her brow. "What do you mean?" Seeing that he had managed to get the attention of Durara and everyone present, Hutrud continued, "What I'm trying to say is that we still don't know whether what he said is true or not. What if the dwarves purposely altered Jomnuk's memories to throw us off? Even something similar is a threat to us right now." Hutrud looked into the eyes of everyone present. Then, pointing at me, he stated, "Before granting him such high authority, we should verify whether or not he is actually capable of removing the defensive system." Tap. 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 Tapping on the table, Hutrud squinted for a second. He looked in my direction, asking me, "You're okay with such arrangements, no?" "Yes, no problem," I replied back without a hint of nervousness. My response seemed to have pleased Hutrud, who clapped his hands and looked towards the other Duergars seated in the room. Good, good. Is everyone else in favor of this? I am fine with it. The first to speak up was a relatively younger Durgar. He had no beard and short brown hair on his head. Unlike the other Durgars present in the hall, he set a bright impression. But none of the Durgar present were fooled by his outer appearance. Everyone knew just how sinister and insidious the young-looking Durgar was. So am I. After the younger Durgar spoke up, the others in the room also showed no signs of resistance as they agreed to go with Hertrid's proposition. Seeing everyone joining Hertrid's side, clenching her fists, Durara had no choice but to also agree. Fine. Turning her attention back towards me, she ordered once more, this time with a different directive. Carl, you've heard them. Prove your worth and disable one of the beacons of the defensive system. Send those bastards into a panic. Chapter 333, Infiltration 1. This should be the place. Leopold murmured as he looked at an enormous building in front of him. It should be. Besides him were Ava and Hein. Since the barrier had been set up and was covering the whole mountain, they decided to use the free time they had available to fix their equipment. Although they wanted to rest, they acknowledged the fact that before they could do that, they had to have all of their equipment ready. After all, no one knew what could happen in the future. The barrier could be turned off at any moment, and they knew that if that happened, they'd be the first to die. This was something they had learned during their journey to Henler. C.I. clank. Entering the building, a wave of hot hair brushed against the skin of everyone present. It was already hot outside, but the moment they entered the building, it felt as though they were inside of a steaming hot sauna. Breathing started to become more challenging, and sweat started forming on the side of their faces. Wiping the sweat away from his face, Hein tiredly muttered. It's way too hot here, I'm going to die. I feel you. Leopold lazily muttered. The heat was causing his body to feel extremely lethargic. How may I help you? Respectfully greeting them at the lobby was a dwarven girl. With a smile on her face, she kindly looked at Leopold and the others who had just arrived. Unlike them, she was not sweating. From the looks of it, she was used to this type of heat. Hey! Leaning against the counter, Leopold breathed out in exhaustion. Plaque! Taking out his gun, he placed it on the counter and lethargically asked. Where can I get ammunition for this? I'm kind of running low.
Ha!
It's too hot. This. Lowering her head, the dwarven girl stared at the gun-like device on the counter. Pointing at the gun, she looked at Leopold and asked. May I? Go ahead. Picking up the gun, she carefully analyzed it from top to bottom. After a while, putting it back on the counter, she pointed towards a corridor on the right side of the lobby. Judging from the model of the artifact you showed me, what you're looking for should be over there. Prices can vary from what types of bullets you are trying to get. Thank you. Thanking the receptionist, Leopold took the gun and proceeded to head towards the direction she had pointed at. Oops, I almost forgot. However, just as he was about to leave, halting his steps, he suddenly recalled something. Turning back, he looked at the receptionist and asked. Do you perhaps know of anyone named Melville? Mulville? Mulville. Frowning, Leopold scratched the side of his head as he tried his best to remember the name of the dwarf that Rin had told him to visit. Unfortunately for him, his memory wasn't the best, and therefore, he had quite the trouble trying to remember the name of the dwarf that Rin had mentioned. Damn it, it's at the tip of my tongue. Mulville? Morvilla? Listening by the side, the receptionist's brows jumped up. With a hesitant look, she asked. Are you perhaps talking about Sir Malville?
Ah.
Snap. Snapping his fingers, Leopold pointed his finger at the receptionist and excitedly nodded his head. Mulville, yes. That's the name. It's Malville. Yes. That's exactly what I said. The receptionist's face froze for a second. Leopold's behavior had left her speechless, however, she was quick to recover. She had seen all types of individuals. Compared to them, Leopold was a lot milder. With a perfect businesslike smile, she asked. You wish to meet Sir Malville? Correct? Leopold then pointed towards Ava, who was silently standing behind him. You see, my companion over here needs to have her artifact fixed. From what we've heard, this Melon is very skilled and can help her fix her artifact. I see. By now she had already understood what type of character was and completely ignored the fact that Leopold had once again mistaken the name. Touching her hair, she made a difficult face. Let me see what I can do. Taking out a communication device, the receptionist tried to get in contact with Malville. While she was waiting for him to pick up, turning her attention back to Leopold, she reminded. Don't get your hopes up. Malville is incredibly busy, so I can't say if he will meet you or not. Don't get too disappointed if he rejects you. That's fine. Oh, before I forget. Leaning by the counter, Leopold whispered. If possible, tell him that we were referred by a guy called Ren. Ren? Yes. Okay. Though confused, the receptionist kept that in mind. Hello? Sir Malville, yes. It wasn't long before Malville picked up. Once he did, the receptionist unconsciously straightened her back and started to relay everything that Leopold had told her. Yes, they are human. They said that they were referred by a human named Ren. Yes, okay, I got it. The call went on for a couple of minutes before finally, after speaking to Malville for a short period of time and turning off the communication device, the receptionist fixed her clothes and smiled towards Leopold and the others. Please follow me, Malville is willing to speak to you. Inferno headquarters, unknown location. At the Elder's orders, I was asked to prove my capabilities. I didn't mind this as it perfectly coincided with my plans. This is the equipment that you can use in order to do your task. Arriving inside of a large room, the first thing I saw was an enormous levitating panel. Displayed on the panel were all sorts of different pieces of information and commands. To be honest, I could barely understand anything that was displayed on it, but even then, calmly walking towards it, I pretended to look at it with disinterest. Stroking my beard, I muttered. I see. Is there anything that you are unsatisfied with? The guard that brought me here asked. Lightly glancing in his direction, I shook my head. No, everything is fine. Here are the items that you have requested. Extending his hand, the guard handed me a small pouch. Upon seeing the pouch, my lips twisted upwards. Good. Snatching the pouch from the guard's hands, I opened it and looked through its contents. After a while, nodding my head, I gestured for the guard to leave. Good, everything is here. You may now leave. Understood, I will be waiting outside. If anything happens, not hesitate to call for me. Turning around, I walked in front of the panel and focused my attention on it, completely ignoring the guard's existence. According to the files I received, Carl Callum was an individual who had 0 on things that were non-artifact related. He would always show an aloof and disinterested expression on his face whenever he interacted with others. At least that was what it said on his profile. Thanks to the chip inside of my head, I was able to store an incredible amount of information in my head. From their behavior, traits, and hobbies, I was able to memorize a lot of things. As such, I knew exactly how Carl acted and behaved. This looks like something that would come out straight from the movies. I inwardly muttered as I admired the panel in front of me. Though it wasn't the first time he had seen this, it never ceased to amaze me whenever I saw it. See, I clank. As I was analyzing the panel, the door behind me suddenly closed. Without paying much attention to it, I continued to pay attention to the panel. The sound most likely came from the guard from before, as he had probably left the room, leaving me inside of this place by myself. Even then, I continued to focus on the panel in front of me. Since I was currently being monitored by the surveillance system, even if the guard had left, I couldn't quite do anything. In fact, there was a high chance that the elders were currently watching over me from the surveillance system. Let's get this started. Placing my hand on the panel, a circular spiral animation manifested on the screen, encircling the palm of my hand. Thereafter, multiple different commands appeared in my vision. All of them were in the Dwarven language, but I had no trouble reading them. Having stayed in Hellar for quite a while now, I could now understand and speak the language. This was all due to the chip inside of my head. If not for it analyzing the language, I would have never been able to speak it. Though it took a while, it made this mission possible. It should be this. Pressing on the panel, a small holographic keyboard appeared in front of me. T. 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 With the chip in his head working, my fingers quickly danced on the keyboard. Since you guys want me to prove my abilities, that's exactly what I'll do. There were a total of 15 beacons built around the walls of the city. At the moment, I was planning on shutting one down. Prior to the incident, I had Jomnuk secretly teach me how to shut down one of the beacons. Since we both knew that this was crucial for the plan, he had no qualms with it and as such revealed to me how to shut down one of the beacons that connected to the main defensive system. He obviously only taught me how to shut one down. Regarding the other 14 beacons, I had no clue. But this was enough. Enough to convince the elders that I wasn't all talk. Today, we are here to discuss your inability to protect Jomnuk Dreamgrip, exposing all of us to danger. A cold voice sounded inside a large white room where seated on a large wooden semicircular desk were multiple dwarfs. Judging from the pressure that was oozing from their small bodies, it was apparent that each and every single dwarf present was an important figure. At the moment all of their eyes were focused on a human figure. He stood with his back straight, and his clear brown eyes fearlessly looked at the dwarves opposite to him. The figure was none other than Waylon. The news of Jomnuk getting kidnapped had sent the higher-ups into a state of panic. Being the one responsible for protecting Jomnuk, Waylon bore the full brunt of the dwarf's rage. At the moment he was put under trial for his failure in protecting Jomnuk, one of their best engineers and the dwarf responsive for setting up their barrier. His kidnapping had obviously dealt a massive blow to the dwarfs, and Waylon, the one responsible for being unable to defend Jomnuk, was currently being glared at by half of the dwarfs inside of the room. Even then, under the glares of the dwarves, he kept a calm and composed face. Ever since he had accepted the plan, he knew that he was going to face a similar situation. I can at least do this much. This much was nothing new to him. Ren was currently in the middle of infiltrating Inferno, an organization that was just as scary as the Monolith, if not even scarier. What Ren was going through was probably 1,000,000 times more dangerous than what he was currently going through. And it was because of this that Waylon did not have an ounce of nervousness as he stood in front of some of the most powerful dwarves in the human domain. Plus, it's not like he didn't have a plan for this. In fact, everything was going just as he and Ren had discussed. As he thought that far, Waylon inwardly laughed. That kid is crazy. Ever since meeting Ren, his dull days at the Dwarven domain had become a lot more interesting. For that, he had to thank Ren.